Depth 10928 meters.
That call came from a submersible, alone, nearly 7 miles beneath the surface, under pressure strong enough to crush a submarine hull in a fraction of a second. Something is alive down there, and until recently, almost nobody had looked closely. What's living in the Mariana Trench is more unsettling than anything in space, and not because of any invented monster. It's fish held together by the exact pressure that would kill them anywhere else, and pollution that reached the darkest point on Earth before most scientists ever did. We've photographed galaxies billions of light years away. We still don't know what covers most of our own ocean floor, and to understand why, the first thing to actually grasp is just how deep that floor really goes. What the trench actually is. Nothing about this place should exist the way it does. The Mariana Trench sits in the western Pacific Ocean, not far from the Mariana Islands, near Guam. And the moment you start comparing it to anything else on the planet, the numbers stop making sense. It is not just deep. It is the deepest place on the entire planet.
The Challenger Deep, which is only a small part of the Mariana Trench, is something like 50 times the size of the Grand Canyon.
The lowest point is called the Challenger Deep. It drops to somewhere around 10,935 meters below the surface, depending on which survey you trust. That's close to 36,000 feet straight down, a number too large to actually picture. So picture something instead. Picture Mount Everest, now ripping it out of the ground and dropping it into that hole. The peak, the highest point on Earth, would still sit more than 2 kilometers underwater, a hole that deep doesn't form gently, and this one didn't. The trench stretches roughly 2,550 kilometers, curved like a crescent moon carved into the seafloor, and it exists because 2 massive slabs of the Earth's crust, called tectonic plates, are colliding in slow motion. The Pacific Plate is sliding directly underneath the smaller Mariana Plate next to it, a process geologists call subduction, and that grinding plate force beneath plate has been going on for millions of years without a single pause. Humans didn't stumble onto any of this by accident. In 1875, a British expedition aboard a ship called the HMS Challenger became the first to identify the trench at all, and they did it with almost nothing. No sonar, no cameras, just a weighted rope dropped over the side, measured against how far it sank. Their estimate came back at about 5 miles down. Also completely wrong. It took until 1951, more than 70 years later, for sonar technology to finally reveal the trench went almost twice as deep as anyone had guessed. That gap between what we thought was down there and what's actually down there is about to become the whole story. The environment itself is the horror. Depth alone doesn't explain why nothing should survive down there. What actually makes the bottom of this trench so hostile is everything sitting on top of it.
The window that I look out actually pushes in toward me under 16,000 pounds per square inch of pressure.
Start with the weight. At the bottom of the Challenger Deep, the pressure pressing down on every square inch is somewhere around 16,000 pounds. That's over 1,000 times what you feel standing on solid ground right now. Scientists trying to put a number to it have compared it to having roughly 50 jumbo jets stacked directly on top of a single point. Then there's the light, or rather, the total absence of it. Past about 1,000 meters down, sunlight simply stops, gone completely, and it stays that way for the remaining 6 miles to the bottom. Nothing living below that line has ever seen light in any form. Not once, not ever. And the cold matches the dark. Water temperatures down there hover just above freezing, cold enough to make survival even harder for anything trying to hold on in this environment. Scientists eventually gave this entire zone, everything below roughly 20,000 feet, its own name, the Hadal zone. It's named after Hades, the Greek god of the underworld, and that wasn't a poetic accident. Researchers picked that name because nothing else quite captured what this place actually is. Pressure and cold like that don't just make the trench hard to survive in. They make it hard to even reach in the first place. And the machines humans have sent down to try have paid for that the hard way. The machines we've lost trying to get there. Reaching the bottom of this trench isn't really about bravery. It's about engineering, and engineering has a way of finding its own limits the hard way. In the entire history of human exploration, only 5 crewed missions have ever reached the very bottom of the Challenger Deep, and the gaps between those missions tell their own story. Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh got there first, in 1960, aboard a submersible, a small crewed vehicle built specifically to survive extreme underwater pressure, called the Trieste. More than 50 years passed before anyone tried again. 5 decades where the deepest point on Earth simply sat there, unvisited. When someone finally did try, it was James Cameron, the film director, who went down alone in 2012 in a vehicle he'd helped design himself. Then the pace picked up. Victor Vescovo followed with a series of dives starting in 2019. A Chinese crew reached the bottom aboard a submersible called Fendugio in 2020. 5 missions. In the entire history of the species. That's the scale of how hard this actually is, and even unmanned vehicles, built with no human life at risk, aren't safe down there. In May of 2014, a research submersible called Nereus, one of only 4 vehicles ever built capable of reaching Hadal depths, was 30 days into a 40-day mission when contact simply stopped. It wasn't in the Mariana Trench itself. It was operating in the nearby Kermadec Trench at the time, but the depth and the danger were the same. The recovery team found debris floating on the surface not long after. Investigators concluded the vehicle suffered a catastrophic implosion, its entire hull crushed in a fraction of a second under pressure exceeding 16,000 pounds per square inch, with no warning and no distress signal sent before it happened. One moment, the crew was watching live footage. Next, the screen just went black. And there was nothing to diagnose afterward, because there was no malfunction anyone could have predicted. No slow mechanical failure building up in advance. Just pressure, instantly and completely winning against one of the most advanced deep-sea vehicles ever built. That's the environment everything living down there has to survive in permanently. And somehow, life still found a way to do it. What actually lives there? Given everything working against it, the trench should be empty. It isn't. And what's actually down there doesn't need any exaggeration to be strange. Start with the fish that shouldn't be able to exist at that depth at all. Filmed at nearly 8,200 meters down, the Mariana Snailfish holds the record for the deepest fish ever recorded on camera anywhere on Earth. Its body is soft and almost see-through, translucent enough that you can make out its organs underneath the skin. It doesn't have a hardened skeleton the way most fish do. Its bones are thin, its skull barely developed. Because building rigid bone takes energy the fish's body would rather spend just staying alive at that pressure. Bring one to the surface and it would fall apart, its body held together by the very crushing weight that would kill almost anything else. Even deeper than the snailfish, past 27,000 feet, researchers have recorded cusk eels. Despite the name and the eel-like shape, these are true fish, close relatives of tuna and seahorses, somehow surviving across one of the widest depth ranges of any species on the planet, from shallow coastal water all the way down to the deepest fish habitat ever confirmed. Then there are the amphipods, tiny shrimp-like scavengers that turn out to be the most abundant animals anywhere in the Hadal zone, living off scraps of debris that drift down from far above. Most stay small. One species doesn't. Alicella gigantea can grow up to 13 inches long, a genuine giant compared to its shallow water relatives, and nobody fully understands why deep-sea creatures like this one grow so much larger than they're supposed to. And then there's the xenophyophore, a single-celled organism, just one cell, large enough to see without a microscope. It survives by doing something almost unsettling in its simplicity. It surrounds its food entirely and absorbs it directly into its own body. Every one of these creatures on its own is strange enough to build a whole video around. But the real surprise came when researchers stopped looking at individual animals and started looking for entire communities of them living together at once. In 2024, a Chinese crewed submersible called Fenduzhe, which translates to striver, completed 23 separate dives into the trench and found something bigger than any single creature. Thousands of worms and mollusks living together, forming the deepest animal colony ever observed by humans, spread across depths from roughly 8,200 feet down to 31,000 feet. Life that doesn't need the sun at all. This next discovery didn't happen in the Mariana Trench, and that's worth saying plainly rather than blurring past it. But it matters here anyway, because what it reveals about Hadal life anywhere raises an obvious question about what's still sitting undiscovered in this specific trench. Unfound simply because nobody's looked in the right place yet. In July of 2025, researchers from the Chinese Academy of Sciences published findings in the journal Nature describing thriving colonies of tubeworms and clams living almost 9,533 meters down in two other Pacific trenches entirely, the Kuril-Kamchatka Trench and the Western Aleutian Trench, the stretch of ocean running between the Russian Far East and Alaska. What makes these communities strange isn't just the depth, it's how they're staying alive down there at all. Nearly every living thing on the surface of this planet depends, directly or indirectly, on sunlight. Plants grow from it, animals eat the plants, and the entire food chain builds outward from that one source. None of that applies almost 6 miles down, because sunlight has never reached that far and never will. Instead, these tubeworms and clams survive through a process called chemosynthesis. Bacteria living inside their own tissue convert methane and hydrogen sulfide, chemicals seeping up out of cracks in the seafloor, into usable energy, the same basic job sunlight does for a plant, just running on chemistry instead of light. The worms and clams then live entirely off what those bacteria produce. The scale of it is what really surprised researchers. This isn't one lucky vent or a single isolated patch. These communities stretch across roughly 2,500 kilometers of trench floor, distributed widely enough that the research team proposed the existence of something they're calling a chemosynthetic life corridor, life like this potentially running through Hadal trenches worldwide. That idea is still just a hypothesis. It has not been confirmed in the Mariana Trench specifically, and the researchers themselves haven't claimed that it has. But it means the basic rules of survival, sunlight in, life out, simply don't apply at the bottom of the ocean. And if it's happening in two trenches nobody thought to look closely at, the honest answer for whether it's happening here too is nobody knows yet. The sound that took a decade to explain. Not everything strange about this trench is something you can see. Some of it you can only hear. And one particular sound stumped scientists for 10 straight years. Worth being precise before diving in. What follows isn't a creature living inside the trench. It's something recorded passing directly over it, which is its own kind of unsettling in a different way. In 2014, underwater gliders surveying near the Mariana Islands picked up a sound nobody could immediately explain. Researchers nicknamed it the Biotwang. It opens with a low, mournful moan, then snaps into a sequence of high-pitched metallic pings, a sound multiple scientists independently compared to sound effects out of Star Trek or Star Wars. It lasted only a few seconds at a time, repeated unpredictably, and for 2 full years, nobody could say what was making it, or why, or whether it was even coming from something alive at all. It took until 2024, a full decade after the first recording, for researchers to finally trace the Biotwang back to its source, using AI-assisted audio analysis to sift through more than 200,000 hours of ocean recordings. The answer turned out to be the bride's whale, an elusive baleen whale, rarely seen, and even more rarely recorded. And here's the distinction worth holding on to. Bride's whales aren't Hadal creatures. They don't live in the trench. What they were actually doing was swimming near the surface close to the Mariana Islands, using the trench's open water as a place to call out to each other. The evidence that finally nailed it down came from watching the whales themselves. Lead researcher Anne Allen put the discovery plainly. Once is a coincidence, twice is happenstance, but 9 times it's definitely a bride's whale. Scientists now believe the calls may function as a kind of long-distance contact. Call, essentially the ocean's own version of Marco Polo. Whales calling out into open water and listening for another whale to call back across enormous, lightless distances. But it's not the only ocean sound that spent years unexplained before turning out to be something almost mundane. Back in 1997, hydrophones picked up an even louder, lower rumble nicknamed the bloop, a sound so massive it was picked up by sensors thousands of kilometers apart. For years, people speculated it might be something enormous and undiscovered, hiding somewhere in the deep. It wasn't. Researchers eventually traced it to Antarctic ice, fracturing and grinding against the seafloor as ancient glaciers broke apart. Sound and unexplained species are one kind of mystery. What actually showed up inside the animals living in this trench turned out to be a very different, much grimmer one. The pollution nobody expected to find. In 2017, researchers tested amphipods from the Mariana and Kermadec trenches for industrial pollutants and found concentrations up to 50 times higher than crabs living in one of China's most polluted rivers. Every sample, at every depth, came back contaminated with PCBs and PBDEs, chemicals used in industrial fluids and in flame retardants, the coatings added to furniture, and fabric to slow down fires. Neither chemical belongs anywhere near a trench 6 miles down. Reviewer Catherine Daffern called the results disturbing, and for good reason. These trenches sit thousands of miles from the nearest factory. There's no local source down there, no nearby pipe or spill to point to. The contamination had to travel the entire distance on its own. A 2020 study finally figured out how. Dead fish from the surface, carrying mercury absorbed from human pollution, sink and get eaten by scavengers waiting below. Lead researcher Joel Blum called it a conveyor belt, quietly moving pollution from the sunlit surface down to the darkest point on Earth. Sometimes the trash didn't even need a conveyor belt. In 2019, Victor Vescovo's record dive found a plastic bag and candy wrappers on the trench floor. In 2023, oceanographer Dawn Wright, the first black researcher to reach Challenger Deep, found a beer bottle sitting almost 6.7 miles down. She put it plainly afterward: proof humanity needs to do better by the ocean we depend on. Human trash reached the most remote point on Earth before most human scientists ever did. And that fact alone says something about how little of this place we've actually managed to see. the actual space comparison. Every mystery covered so far comes down to one uncomfortable fact, and it's worth stating plainly instead of dressing it up. Right now, we have significantly better maps of the surface of Mars, a planet tens of millions of miles away, than we have of our own seafloor. That's not an exaggeration for effect. As of the most current figures from NOAA, the U.S. government agency responsible for tracking ocean and atmospheric science, only about 28.7% of the global seafloor has been mapped using modern high-resolution sonar. The rest exists only in rough, low-detail approximations, or not at all. Mapping isn't the same as actually seeing, and the gap there is even wider. Explorers have physically laid eyes on less than 0.001% of the deep ocean floor, a total surface area smaller than the state of Rhode Island, spread across an entire planet's worth of ocean. Compare that to what's happened above us. Space agencies have landed rovers on Mars, mapped the Moon down to individual craters, and sent telescopes far enough out to photograph galaxies billions of light years away. None of that is a small achievement, and it's genuinely one of the most impressive things our species has ever done. But it makes the ocean comparison land harder, not softer. We reached another planet before we finished mapping our own. Scientists estimate there could be somewhere between 700,000 and 1 million species living in the ocean altogether, and roughly 2/3 of them, possibly more, have never been formally discovered or described. Close to 2,000 new species get added to that list every single year, which means the list itself is nowhere near finished. We've built machines that can photograph galaxies, and we still can't tell you what covers most of the floor of our own ocean. Why Unsettling doesn't need a monster. At this point, the obvious question is whether something bigger is still hiding down there. It's worth answering directly instead of leaving it open for speculation. The theory that comes up constantly involves Megalodon, the giant prehistoric shark, and the idea that it somehow survived, undetected, in the deepest part of the ocean. The fossil record says otherwise. Megalodon disappeared roughly 3.6 million years ago, and everything known about the species points to a warm-water, surface-hunting predator built to chase large marine mammals near the sun, not something adapted to total darkness and near-freezing cold. It would also need enormous amounts of food to survive in one of the most nutrient-starved environments on the entire planet. There's no version of that math that works. So no, there's no ancient sea monster waiting at the bottom of the Challenger Deep, though it might be less of a relief than it sounds, because what's actually down there, confirmed and filmed and named, is stranger than any monster theory could invent. None of it needed to be fictional to be unsettling. It just needed someone to finally look. We looked for monsters and found something stranger. Real animals surviving on chemistry instead of sunlight, on a seafloor still less than a third mapped after 150 years of trying. Space got the telescopes. Our own ocean floor is still waiting in the dark.